Today I'm speaking with Kelita Sahliah. Kelita, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to see you, and you are all the way over in Birmingham, UK. Is that right?
It's Birmingham.
But how do you pronounce it?
But I don't like saying it because of my accent. Birmingham.
Birmingham. Is that,
Birmingham.
and you're called a Brummie, is that right?
Yeah, I'm a
Gotcha.
Brummie.
For those of us who haven't been to Birmingham, what is it like over there? What's life like?
Oh, well, to me, it's just normal because that's all I know. It's meant to be the second biggest city in the UK
Hmm.
after London, but in terms of what's here, it's not. It's really not. I'd say Manchester is probably the next big city, but it's okay. It's all I know. So
Gotcha. Very cool. I'd love to visit someday. And you also, just in terms of a bio, you are a fellow YouTuber, which we're going to talk about your channel in a little bit. But that's how we connected first. You have some amazing stuff there. And you are a stay-at-home mom, and you trade and invest Forex and crypto. Is that right?
yes, yeah, I do.
That's awesome. That's for anyone that knows my channel. The reason that I'm called the Harmonic Atheist is because of I trade harmonic Fibonacci patterns. So do you use that at all, by the way, harmonic patterns?
No, I don't. I'm still Fibonacci still it still goes over my head. I'm not gonna
Gotcha.
lie. So I'm still a baby in the whole field.
Well, maybe at some point I'll do a little crash course for you one-on-one, but it's pretty cool stuff. I use Fibonacci horizontal lines as well as Fibonacci pitchforks, harmonic trading patterns, missed pivots, as well as trend lines and hitting the backside of trend lines. So
Yeah.
it's pretty cool stuff when you get into it. It's amazing how many people realize it's not gambling. Like you're not just guessing. There actually is a rhythm and a rhyme to the markets, but it's when you see it, it's like, whoa, some of the stuff is really pre-planned well in advance.
Yeah.
But anyway, that'll be a topic for another day. And you grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist church, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And in terms of, you're also, again, a stay-at-home mom. You have a boy and a girl, 2 kids. What else, in terms of a bio, should we know about you? What are your hobbies or pastimes?
My hobbies, really, I spend a lot of time online researching, what's going on in the world. To be honest, that's my hobby. My hobby really is knowing more of myself and exploring more things, pushing myself, my body to new limits. It's literally just learning about me. So that's what I'm doing right now.
That's awesome. And I think we're going to be touching on some of those topics here today. So that'll be great to dive into some of those topics with you. And wanted to start by just asking you if you could to take us into your story. Again, I know that you grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist church, but tell us, how that all started, and especially if you could touch on some of the things that you recall being taught, like the primary things that were the core elements of your faith and belief, and your own personal experience. What was it like? Did you, actually place your faith in Jesus at some point as your personal savior? Anything like that? And then, tell us any stories that you recollect from that time frame.
Yeah, so I joined the church as a child. I was 6 or 7. So I joined with my mom, and I believed generally core values. I believed God created everything, and simply you either go to heaven or hell. And yeah, that was it as a child. That's basically it. Just God created this whole world. Everything was God. Everything. Yeah.
And did you, when you mentioned that you went with your mom, was your dad not involved?
No, my dad wasn't involved. My mom, she joined the church through, it was like was it through health? I don't know if you've heard of aloe vera.
Yeah.
Aloe vera, and there's kind of like a drinking version you can have, and the aloe vera gel. So the Seventh-day Adventist church, they had like representatives. So it was through aloe my mom actually got involved in the church. So
like some kind of business, they were selling a product. Okay.
So they were selling the product, and then we got into aloe, and then they introduced her to the church and Jesus and Sabbath and all of that stuff. So it was like, as a child, all of a sudden now everything is normal, and then it's like, oh, it's Sabbath, this is the Lord's Day now, and we have to turn the TV off because it's sunset. So when we used to watch the clock, and the moment it was sunset is like, okay, TV has to go off now.
Mm.
And that was literally because that's how my mom was taught as well. Because my mom, she didn't know anything. She's going in as an adult, and that's what she's being told. And she was told, oh, you can't watch any of the soaps anymore. Yeah, just things like that. So
Mm.
yeah.
So you said this was around 6 or 7. So were you not exposed to Christianity before that time frame?
Not really, in the general sense of, it was more Ethiopian, like not really Rasta, sorry, Rastafarian. So my dad is a Rasta. So we had like a picture of, I don't know if you've heard of Kelita Sahliah1. So we
Mhm.
had a picture of him on the wall, and we used to say that prayer. That's what we used to do. But I just, because my mom and dad did it, I just done it. I didn't pay much attention. But in terms of becoming aware, it was when my mom kind of drifted into the church, and then everything changed. Kelita Sahliah1's picture come off the wall,
Mm.
and we had to learn the Lord's Prayer now. It was a different prayer. And yeah, but I guess it seemed normal because I was already doing the other prayer. So it was just something different.
Mm.
Yeah.
I know our main point of our interview is not about the Rastafarianism, but just for the sake of anyone that hasn't heard about that worldview, do you remember anything that you were taught about it, or anything that you have heard since from your dad about what they believe and how they see the world?
I'm the youngest of 5, so my dad spent more time with like the eldest 3, teaching them more about that religion. So they learned the alphabet in Ethiopian. They learned all that. So I wasn't really deep into it. It's more like my dad, he's like completely ital. He has no meat. I know most Rastafarians, they just don't touch pork or anything, but my dad's more like the ital. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, that's really it, really. It's just food.
So was
Food.
he opposed or upset when your mom became a Christian?
Uh, he he doesn't like it. He doesn't like, even now, he's against Christianity and religion, like completely.
Gotcha.
So of course she's still in it completely, and she's happy. So I'm happy for her.
So I wanted to dive into some of the parts of what you were taught in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. My first question would just be, obviously, with the phrase seventh day, we're talking about Saturday, and that they would use that to refer to the holiness of the Sabbath, that you're
Yeah.
supposed to rest. What did that look like practically? Like both in terms of how you all did that as a family, but even as a broader community as the church. What were the rules and the expectations for how you treated Saturdays?
So it was the Lord's Day. So anything that happened from sunset Friday to sunset Saturday was focused just entirely on the Lord or the church. So any church duties, not specifically, of course, we did church duties outside of that day, but on that day, it was no other distractions. So
Hmm.
I wouldn't work, I wouldn't do any assignments, any homework, wouldn't clean. I wouldn't clean. So it's similar to the Jews. We would make sure Friday the house is just tidy, neat, everything is done, all the cooking is done. So Saturday we're not doing anything. We'd it's meant to be rest, like a day of rest, but it
Mhm.
felt like the most busiest day, because we'd go into church, and we'd have our church service and fellowship, we'd have lunch. There was many days it was nice because it was fellowship.
Mhm.
And we'd so from the morning it's like Sabbath school, so instead of Sunday school it's Sabbath school, and then we'd go into praise and worship, and then the sermon, and then we'd have our lunch, and then usually we'd have something called AY, which is called, it's Adventist Youth Service. So sometimes the youth would take it, but not all the time. We didn't have much youth in our church.
Mhm.
And we'd study more of the Bible. We'd study more of the Bible, another topic, and yeah, play games. And after Sabbath, say if it's winter and Sabbath ends earlier, we would have a social, and then that's when things are not so restrictive, and we'd play games, have fun. If Sabbath was in the summer, then we'd probably just go to the park. And yeah, and then after Sabbath, when it's done and we're back home, starts all over again.
Hmm.
Starts all over again.
With obviously being in church all the time like that, you got, I'm sure, a lot of sermons and a lot of preachments given to you.
Yeah.
Would you say that they are the kind of church that would do altar calls where they would invite you to repent of your sin and turn to the Lord?
Yes. Yeah, it wasn't so blatant as come and repent from your sins, and but whatever they said in the sermon, and if you felt touched, and they say, they say it in a way where it's like, if this touched you and you want change in your life, you're ready for Jesus to take the wheel, or just anything, and your emotions are all high, isn't it, because they've said certain things in the sermon, and then you'd go up if you'd want to. But I went up a few times, but I have to admit there was times I felt pressured when they'd done the altar call, because I felt, if I don't go up, how is this going to look on me? So there was times I've gone up because I thought I had to, It's
an interesting point. I remember, you make me remember how sometimes they would do this thing where they would say, no one's looking at you, every head is bowed, every eye is closed, but if you need prayer, if something's going on in your life or you want salvation, raise your hand. And if it went on for a while, and I always had my eyes closed, I wasn't breaking the rules, so I don't know what they were seeing, but assuming that they didn't see many hands go up, or any hands, they would kind of drag it on for a while. And I remember sometimes even something like, I know there's someone out there. I know it. I know someone needs a touch from the hand of God today. I know someone's crying out for this or that. And it was like, wow, like they really, really, really want to be able to count a hand and say, we brought this many people to the Lord. And I remember too, even just with broader outreaches, whether it was VBS for kids. Do you have VBS there? Vacation Bible School? Like a summertime thing?
Yeah.
And any kind of outreach, teen outreach, they would always give a report after it was over the next Sunday of, we had 12 people give their lives to Christ. And you could tell like numbers meant a lot. They wanted to be able to say, we put this effort in and this is what came out of it. And it's amazing the pressure that you're saying that they put on that. And did you ever feel too, like there was, this is similar, but a little different, the sense of the praying, like PREY, praying on people who are a little bit desperate, where like they're, you know what I mean by that?
Yeah. Vulnerable people, the church attacks. I'm using the word attack, but they prey on the vulnerable people, those who are at a weak time in their life. Because I have to admit, there was many moments, like growing up in the church, I fluctuated in and out, but definitely this was before I became like super strict. But every time I kind of went back in, it's because I was going through a horrible time, and I felt, a low moment in my life. So I felt like the only way was for Jesus to save me and go to church. So yeah.
When you say you went back and forth, do you mean at all that you got saved multiple times?
No, I baptized once, but I was more regular. I was regular, and then I stopped going, and then was more regular. But that was through my teenage years. And but I was baptized at what age? 14. Okay. I was baptized.
Do they preach eternal security? Like once if you're really saved, like not if you're faking it, but if you're really, really saved, your name is written in the Lamb's book of life, so to speak, you're in forever. Like you are one of his children. He will never let you out of his hand, in a loving sense, like not like you can't escape, but just he will never let you go back to the flames of hell. Did you feel secure that he had you?
No. They say that, like, they don't really preach it in a way in the Seventh-day Adventist church, like, the moment you're baptized and that's it and you say, they don't say that. However, they've said that phrase many times in their sermons, like, the Lord will never let you go, once you turn to him, then that's it. They put it in that way, but then it just felt like you had to keep doing stuff constantly to actually be saved. And it felt, well, when is it going to happen? Because we're told everything we do more or less is a sin, so we feel we keep sinning, even down to the thoughts in our mind. So this is where it became really, really bad and toxic, because any little thought that I thought was not of the Lord, then I'm worrying about how. I'm worrying, am I going to go to hell? Am I not going to be saved because of this? Because I've had this thought. If I die right now, even though I was baptized, because I've had this thought, what's going to happen? So, yeah.
It's interesting. And I totally can relate to that. I would say that one of the side effects of that in some of the church environments I grew up in is the idea that you need to have a certain level of fervor and excitement and joy and maturity. And until you kind of reach that level, you're kind of in this, like, for lack of a better term, like a maturity purgatory, where you're just like trying desperately to get rid of your, attraction to sin, or your, fatigue of, like, I don't really want to spend that much time in prayer today. 5 minutes will be plenty. That sense of, like, why aren't you on fire for the Lord? And I remember often thinking, like, having this admiration for the usually older, mature Christians who had, like, were in their 60s, 70s, 80s, who you'd read these books too about people's amazing stories, but they just had this sense of, like, I know I've walked with God now for decades, and I've gotten past the attraction of sin. Sin doesn't turn my head like it used to. I am used to just keeping my eyes fixed firmly on Jesus, and it's, everything's about Jesus. My faith is becoming less of a thing that I choose to do and just more part of my worldview. I don't have to as much think, should I trust Jesus? I just know he's trustworthy. And you'd see these more mature Christians and just think, I wish this or that, like, I wish I didn't struggle as much with this issue or that issue. And it did always feel like there's like the spiritual life is kind of up ahead. Like, you need to press forward, work hard. Like, even in biblical terms, you work hard to enter into rest. It's always the concept. You work diligently until you rest, kind of like the Seventh-day Adventist Church. You work hard all 6 days and then you rest. And it definitely left me kind of feeling like it was in a bit of a hamster wheel effect of, like, you can't stop. You have to push forward into the things of the Lord, more firmly, more maturely, grow your roots deeper. And it does leave you kind of feeling like, I guess I'm just not there yet. And it always leaves you wanting more, but never getting there.
Yeah. And I feel personally that that's designed like that. So you never feel like you're getting anywhere. So you keep going. So you keep having to rely on them. And I literally, as you said, I feel it's a hamster wheel.
Yeah. One of the aspects of that hamster wheel that comes up a lot, and I'm just wanted to pick your brain about it, is the whole idea of shame culture. Whether it's shame over, as when you're a little kid, you're ashamed of sins you did. Obviously, you're taught you're a sinner, and so forth. When you hit puberty, of course, you're in this mindset where your hormones are going, and you want to think about things and look at things and explore things, and you feel shame. Did you feel like the shame culture became part of your story at all on any level?
It was my entire experience, to be honest, feeling shame. So from a child, because of the Sabbath, that's where I experienced, like, the most shame, so to say, because I couldn't do things on the Sabbath day that my friends were doing. And Saturday is the main day people do things. So whenever, thankfully my mom let me go. My mom is not the controlling type at all. And in my teenage years, it was all me. There was never no force or no pressure from my mom.
That's awesome.
So she did allow me as like a young child when I had a school party on a Sabbath, she did let me go. But as I kind of got into my teenage years, I didn't even ask my mom when my friends done certain things on the Sabbath, because I thought, no, I can't do it because it is the Sabbath. So whether or not my mom says yes or no, it's still the Lord's day, and I need to pay attention to the Lord. You can't buy or sell on the Sabbath. So if my friends, just any activity, I thought, because I'm feeling guilty and shame for literally just paying or buying anything on that day. And I remember I just really worked around certain stuff. My friends went to Laser Quest one time, and I met them afterwards, and then they wanted to go and get food, and I'd done my best to try and persuade them and to stall them down, so it kind of got closer to Sabbath being over, so I could then get something. So obviously I was with them, so it's like that's why my mom didn't stop me from going. But when I was there, it was all my choice, and it was horrible because I didn't fully enjoy it. I'm seeing all my friends having fun, and then I'm feeling this shame and guilt, like I shouldn't be there when really I wanted to. So that was my first shame, and then it continued as I grew up.
That's amazing. I want to hear more details about what else it brought into your life, but just to comment, it sounds very legalistic. Is the word that comes to mind, like you do it this way. And it does remind me of how the Jewish culture is, where they revere the Sabbath, at least a lot of them I believe do, where you just don't do anything, period. Even I've heard stories about the certain elevators where they just go up to each floor, so you don't have to push the button like you get on, and you don't have to push, I want to go to fifth floor, so I hit the fifth button 5. It just goes to each floor, so you don't. And it's like there's just very big rules about these things, and it's amazing how stifling it is. And yet for generations of people, that's your bread and butter. That's how you live your life. That's part of how you're righteous. And one of the biggest things that comes to mind with that too is just how you get into this mindset, even though you might have a church. I don't know if Seventh-day Adventist church is more of a grace church where they're preaching grace a lot. I'd love to hear what you think about that. But there's a lot of churches where they're preaching grace, but meaning like God's going to love you no matter how many times you fail. Don't worry about how many times you fail. Just focus on God's love. But at the same time, there's all these things that you have to keep thinking about doing. And if you don't do them, like you said, you feel shame about it. You feel bad, and you feel like you're choosing to reject God. And I remember times when I would struggle with stuff and think it almost feels as if, not that I actually did this, but it almost feels as if I said, God, I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to do the opposite. Like I'm going to do a Jonah. I hear you saying go to Nineveh. I'm going the other way. I'm going to Joppa. I think he was going to, I'm turning my back on exactly what you said. And, of course, when you realize, you're like, oh, that's how I was living, even if it wasn't what I was intentionally trying to do. Like, oh, that's a really bad mentality. I need to correct that quickly and, repent of that. Did you feel at all like you were just experiencing that, where you just could not get it right, and that it's almost like the word that comes to mind now is addiction. Like it's an addiction to get back to being right.
Constantly, like I felt in the church, the Seventh-day Adventist church, they say they are the true church of God.
Oh, really?
And yeah, every church does, isn't it? Every church is a true church.
I'll ask you more about that in a second. Yeah.
And they, you've got people in the church that say, oh, I do this. I get up in the morning and I pray for this amount of time, and then I study for this amount of time. And it was that was a big thing for me, because I'm not really an early bird, and it was boring. Like honestly, it was boring reading the Bible and then sometimes praying, and I'm just like, okay, I've said my prayer. How are people praying for a whole hour? It's like I didn't understand. And then I felt bad if I wasn't, getting longer and longer, or spending longer with the Lord each morning, or each day. And it reached a point where I was just like, I can't do it. I can't do it. It just felt so forceful. It felt fake. And then that's when I kind of drifted away from the church until I come back again. So
you mentioned prayer there. With prayers, did you ever struggle with the whole question of, well, two issues that come to mind? Number one, what is God's will, like where he says, I'm going to give you my perfect will. If you're aligned with me, I'm going to steer you into my perfect will. Did you ever struggle with trying to figure out what God's will was? But then also when sometimes when you pray, and sometimes it works out, at least like temporarily, where you're like, okay, I prayed for this and it happened. And then, this is my experience speaking, it blows up in your face. And you're like, I prayed for it. God opened the doors. I thought I got exactly what I asked for, and it crumbled in my hands. Like, what in the world, God? Like, what is this? Did you ever have either of those experiences?
Not so much in terms of something has happened and then, it's kind of crumbled, but I have with some people who I was close to, I've saw that in their life, where they've got exactly just as you said, and it's not what what it should have been, and it's just a disaster. In terms of praying for me, I remember this was a big turning point for me. Someone in my church, she had a son. He was, how old was he at the time? Maybe like 9 or 10 or early teens. And she just she was healthy, fine, and then she had a brain hemorrhage. And she was in the hospital. And I remember I was praying and pleading, and I said, like, Lord, I'd be 100% dedicated, but please don't take this mother away from her child, because he's all she has. No, yeah, she's, you know what I mean. And I was praying, I was crying, and I thought, you know what, this is coming from a selfless part of me, because they're not even in my life, this family. But I was just like, like, surely you can save her. Like, I've heard of many stories of people almost dying and then they've recovered, So I'm like, surely you can do it. And I was praying, crying, and then she passed away. So I was angry. I just felt angry. I was so angry because I didn't understand. I was like, I'm coming from a genuine place. The book, the Bible, many preachers have said, they've said this, and I've done it right now, and you've not heard me. You haven't heard me. And that's when I was just, I took a big step back then, a big step back. Yeah.
And it's amazing how there's always an answer, that the party line that give you, like, well, God had a reason. Some people use those platitudes. Well, God just really wanted her in heaven. And other people, it's like, well, you don't understand. God has a perfect will. He's going to make something glorious out of what looks like a mess. And other times, where maybe someone doesn't die, but they're just not healed. They're just sick for a long, long, long time. It's like God says, wait, or you need to, I'm teaching you a lesson. You need to grow through this and learn to be mature. Like, it doesn't matter what happens. There's always some way to explain God's action or inaction in the
time.
Yeah.
It's always justified. Like I said this in one of my videos, as like every single thing God does, whether wicked or good, but always the evil things, it's justified. It's always justified whenever, a big question, why does so much happen in the world if God is watching, and, why does all the evil things happen? And, it's always justified.
Yeah.
What is this is,
Yeah. And it's amazing. I don't know if you see this currently, and I don't want to get too off track here with this comment, but with coronavirus, I'm seeing people talk about, as they've done with other issues in the last few decades, they just say this is part of God's judgment. Like, God is judging the world for, whatever, for doing this or not doing that. And it's amazing, the mentality when you mix, if it's one thing if someone says, well, I personally didn't get this job, or, this didn't work out because I needed to be mature and God was stretching me. But when you put it on the world scale, where you're talking about even politicians and huge mega church leaders who influence thousands of people saying, this is happening in the world because we're disobeying God. Or if you take it to other realms like that, where there's such cognitive dissonance, like, don't worry about climate change, just focus on the Lord and his kingdom. And you're like, this is crazy. You guys are sending some really toxic messages to a lot of people.
It's true. It's honestly true, because it's a complete different world, because it's just, as you said, don't focus on that, just focus on the Lord, get to heaven and save as many people as you can. And that alone is toxic, because so many people, it's like they've come to me, it's not a genuine connection. It's not a genuine connection. And they're just so focused on, I need to get you to heaven, and that's it. They don't really care about me. They're just like, it's another numbers thing. They may not intentionally say, oh, I just want to get so much people, but it comes across as because that's their complete focus. It's just not genuine. It's not genuine at all. So
one thing that's interesting on that I wanted to touch on at some point, this is a good segue to it. The idea of getting you into heaven is obviously an urgent desire for these people, like you just said. But for a lot of Christians, that's predicated on the bigger context of, if you don't get there, meaning you reject Christ and his salvation, the opposite is hellfire. Seventh-day Adventists take that a different direction, don't they?
It is still the case of, like, if you reject the Lord, basically, if you reject Christ and the Lord, the Father, then you'll end up going to hell. But in terms of the burning forever and ever, we didn't believe that. I'm sure it was until the soul dies, but then can the soul die? I'm not sure. There is a Bible verse, well, I can't remember where it was, it's like gone out of my head, but we didn't believe it was like forever and forever.
Okay.
Torment.
So they ultimately land on some kind of annihilation, where if you don't get to heaven, you just eventually cease to exist.
Cease to exist, basically. Or was it, did the verse say until the flames go? So however long that would take.
Okay.
Flames to go.
Was there any sense of universalism where eventually they'll all get to heaven? Or if you didn't get there when you died right away, you'd never get there?
What they said was, this jumps into Revelation now, so they believe that obviously those who have gone to heaven will go to heaven. They'd have a glorious time, worshiping the Lord forever. And after, was it 1,000 years or a certain period of time, those who was in hell and died will be resurrected again, and they'll be resurrected, and Satan will rule them, and Satan will tempt them to start a war with us in heaven. That's the story in Revelation. And and then that would be the last war, apparently. So
yeah, Armageddon. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, was there a lot of pressure with the end times, the idea of, Jesus could come back any day? Did you hear that kind of message?
The Seventh-day Adventist was like heavy on the end times, because I'm not part of that anymore. It was, Ellen G. White, have you heard of her? And like the Great Disappointment.
Yeah.
And where they thought Jesus was coming in 1840 something.
Oh, she set a date?
Yeah, there was a date and a time, and people were leaving their jobs and everything, and then they were literally ready, standing there waiting for the Lord to come, and then he didn't come. So that was called the Great Disappointment. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church kind of boomed out of that. And you had they've got loads of their books. A big one is the Great Controversy, that they go off, and they have loads of doctrines, like the Sanctuary is one. There's so many, but it's gone from my head. But a lot of it to do with the end times.
And I know I've heard about like the Spirit of Prophecy and books like Messages to Young People. who is, for anyone that doesn't know what we're talking about, who is Ellen G. White related to the Seventh-day Adventist Church?
So
Who was she?
she was the Lord's prophet, basically, and the Lord supposedly spoke through her, and she wrote loads of books, but she was the third person the Lord went to. So he supposedly went to two other people before, and they declined it, two men, and then
They declined the Lord.
or it didn't work out. One of the two. And
like, can you imagine, like, God or Gabriel or Michael comes, the archangel comes and God wants you to do this, please, this is a gracious gift, and they're like, thank you, but no thank you. I'll just go back to my mundane life now that I've seen the glory of the Lord.
Yeah. So so Ellen G. White, she was the third one, and
okay.
It's written in, I don't know if it's one of her books. It must be in the Bible, of how to test if this spirit is truly from the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them, when she was supposedly in a trance, they put a candle there, and it didn't move, like, from her breath, supposedly. And that's how they knew. That was one test. They knew, yeah, she's a prophet from the Lord. And
Makes me think they need to stick up a mirror next and see if she has a reflection. See if she's a vampire. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But people, in all seriousness, people really, really listened to her, right? She was a major force in the church.
Yeah, major force. It was just like, she said in one of her books, you shouldn't have a bath on the Sabbath. Oh. So, people didn't have baths. She mentioned many things, many.
And so she took the legalism to a whole new level, it sounds like, with some of her rules.
Yeah, I feel she kind of added extra rules and regulations, so to say, to the church. And that whole group, Ellen G. White, and you had, is it Harvey Kellogg? Kellogg? He was part, actually. Have you heard of Kellogg's cereal?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So they were actually the people who started it. Two brothers, Kellogg brothers. They were part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church as well.
Okay. Around the same time as Ellen White?
Yes, around about that period. But they fell away. So it's like Kellogg, they introduced their cereals as a health thing first. And I'm sure it was Harvey Kellogg. And so it was there was other people. You had, was it not C.S. Lewis? I'm trying to remember their names. You had a group of people basically that were the foundation of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and then this is kind of like where the church manual came from, and so many instructions in that. You're given that when you're baptized, so I've probably got it somewhere in this house, but it baffled me. Like, when I became a bit more serious into the church, it didn't make sense, because I was like, but this isn't God, though. God hasn't written this. This is now man. But the Seventh-day Adventist Church is heavily based upon the church manual, if you know what I mean. So yeah. I feel, and a lot of people really strictly follow Ellen G. White. And there's a group of people who are just like, no, we don't really follow her that much. We'd rather stick to the Bible. So there's division even in denominations, isn't there?
Yeah, that's fascinating that there's some people that would elevate her work. It sounds like maybe they wouldn't, I don't want to put words in their mouths, but it almost sounds like they would elevate it very closely to being canonical, like part of the actual inspired word. Maybe they wouldn't go that far, but close enough that people who, from my background, were very strict on, like, this is the Bible, you don't add to it. Anything else that we can talk about is just human conjecture, but this is God's word. Everything else is infinitely different and worse. There might be some truths that we stumble across, but God's word is different, holy, separate. And it sounds like they kind of moved her work pretty close to the Bible.
Pretty close. They try and be conservative at times and say, no, it's not replacing the Bible, it's not adding, it's just kind of either next to it or, just a little bit below her. But
like a commentary almost.
Kind of.
Like clarifying what God meant.
Yeah. A lot of people just took it literal. I took it literal. You know, I went through phases where I was reading that more than the Bible. And yeah, that's where all of things like dress reform, health reform, it all came from Ellen G. White. That's how I can put it. I know people say, oh, you know, she's referred it to the Bible and you can pick up bits, but it's like half of the stuff she said, I was like, well, how did you get that from the Bible? How did you get it? And then, of course, as I kind of come out of it, I learned, like, was some of her work plagiarized? Was it this? And I'd heard some of them things while I was deep in it, but I wanted to ignore it. I was just thought, nah, she's from the Lord. She has to be from the Lord. And I didn't accept it. But when I looked back, I was like, well, she probably did plagiarize some of them, you know?
Yeah. I've heard a little bit about that. That's an interesting topic too, to study where she got her stuff from. Well, with the legalism stuff, I was just curious, and I know we're kind of dancing around your story. We'll get back to it very shortly, but just to kind of set the stage for what kind of things you were hearing from the church as you were growing up before you got super serious and then eventually left. What was the mentality about things like a woman's role in the church and the home and society, and maybe somewhat related, like, were there rules about modesty or what you could wear and, you know, things like that, or not necessarily always rules, but just expectations? And what did that look like for a woman?
So it was like, just the role of a woman was to be a wife, mother, housekeeper, and you know, do things pleasing to the Lord, basically, and to please your husband, to more or less just be there for your husband. And we dress code, so you had to, now this is the stricter side, so those who followed Ellen G. White more so, you had to wear a skirt or, you know, a dress, and it had to be below the knee, preferably by the ankles.
So no pants for women, pretty much?
No. And it came to a stage when I was deep in the church, we switched pastors, and the pastor I had, he was cool. He was, you know, it's fine. And then this other pastor came and he said, women can't go on the platform now in trousers. And it was like, what? You know? So that was a shock. And yeah, just modesty. It was just always, you can't, it's like, how are you dressing? You need to make sure you dress for your husband now, or you need to just make sure no one can see you until you're with your husband, until you find a husband, you know. And that's what it was like, but it wasn't so strict before. It's when that other pastor came. It's when he came. And then when I chose to become more strict in the church, then I changed my whole wardrobe. I threw away all my heels because it was bad. I had long skirts. I couldn't wear my hair. I couldn't have hair extensions anymore because that was, you know, was a sin. And yeah, but then I had this battle in my head because it was highlighted to me. It's like, oh, I'm wearing extensions one time. And I thought, well, why can't I wear extensions? But I'm looking around this church now and I'm seeing wigs after weaves after every false hair that you can see. And it's like, so why is the Lord putting it in my route to be, I'd say, completely of what he wants, if you know what I mean? I felt like I was being called to be this example. So that's where even more pressure came in. I wasn't the youth leader, but I was underneath the youth leader. So I was quite high up there. And I thought, well, all the other girls, all the other children are looking up to me. So I felt that pressure as well. I thought, you know what? I need to keep up not wearing the heels. I need to keep up not wearing makeup, jewelry, and all of that. Simple things as earrings. I'd make sure whenever I went to church, there wasn't in. And I'd feel really scared if anyone from church saw me outside of church and I had earrings in. So yeah, modesty.
This is a bit of a side note, but did it ever, as you looked at some of that stuff, those details, Did it ever strike you that the contrast of those rules with meaning in the sense like God was concerned about it to some extent, or at least he was pleased that you were thinking about it, versus the awfulness of something that's happening in the world, such as, there's thousands of kids that are going to die today of starvation. It's like, so God is concerned about your earrings, but he's going to let these kids die. And or war, or now, these days, coronavirus. God's so concerned about the length of your skirt, but he's going to let people die all over the place, or go through, kids being assaulted and hurt, this very day. That stuff, God is watching it, seeing it happen. He could have stopped it, could stop it. He knows it's going to happen again tomorrow. He could prevent it, but he wants to make sure that you're not wearing earrings or something gaudy. And did it ever strike you, at least later, as you started to think through stuff, like, wait a second, or like some of the silly ones, like, God help me get a parking space at the grocery store, but some other kid's, going to die of starvation.
Exactly. It didn't make sense. And I just thought these things are silly, because when it came to, again, like dressing modestly, like the Seventh-day Adventist Church, someone was preaching dress reform, and then it says that all the time your skin must be covered, so you can't have no exposure. So, in summer, I remember one summer after watching this sermon, I was so hot. I was so hot, and I just wanted a short sleeve, just, like this. But I thought I couldn't even do this. I had to wear something that fully covered me. And my sister saw me at times and thought, why are you doing this? Just thinking, are you not hot? I'm not going to keep myself, staying hot wearing the big woolly cardigan in summer just because of what? I don't even know the reason. I just thought I'm pleasing the Lord, and it was horrible.
It's amazing too how different groups are going to read that so differently. Like, but there was a conservative school I went to here in the United States. You probably haven't heard about it. It's called Bob Jones University. But very, very well known in certain circles as being like, oh, that's one of the much more strict schools, militaristic. There are other schools that go much further than them in their legalism, and they would actually make fun of Bob Jones for being too loose. But for most people, they're a pretty strict group. And for the men, you have to be clean shaven all the time. Like, you can't have 5 o'clock shadow all the time. Like, that's how you become really looking like you're serious about the Lord. Is a part of it is you're going to be clean shaven at all times, no matter what. And then I find out there's groups like in the other side of this country, out in like the more towards the west coast, that to them, if you're a man of God, you have not just facial, you have a big beard, like a big one.
Yeah.
And like that's because you're supposed to be looking very different from the women. You're supposed to be masculine. God wants you to look like a leader, and the best way to make a clear difference between you and the women is to have a monstrous beard on your face. And so if you're a man of God, you're not going to shave at all, ever. And it's really fascinating that just everyone's got these little rules and what it looks like to be a man of God or a woman of God. And you end up thinking, this is just crazy. And we're doing it to ourselves over mythology. I know we're jumping ahead of ourselves and saying that, but just over mythology. It's crazy.
It's true. And that brings me back in terms of like the Sabbath day, because I started to question. I was like, it didn't make sense for me. If I've just got like one plate, I'm just going to wash it up and just put it down, so at least it's tidy. And other people would say, oh no, I'm not washing up on the Sabbath, because you can't do that. And again, with one time, me and my partner at the time, we passed like a homeless person, and he went and brought him some food. And then we just started to talk and say, because that's okay to do. We're buying on the Sabbath, but at least we're giving it to a homeless person. Yet we had this topic in one of our AY services, and people were saying, like, if they only had, for example, it was a Sabbath and they only had their tithe money on them, that says they wouldn't even use that tithe money to go and buy someone food who needs it. And this was where I was just like, whoa, a rock in the boat. I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. So you're going to, I'd say, if you're choosing to give to someone, but you're you know that you can when you're kind of meant to. If the Lord says, don't pass me by, because didn't Jesus say that that homeless person on the street, that's me, that you know,
Yeah.
but you're choosing to keep that money to literally give it to the church because it's so called the Lord's money, just because it's the Sabbath day and it's the Lord's money. And I'm like, people have different rules with what they do, because I'd see that as, if I've got money, it's meant to be the Lord's, but someone's in need, I'm gonna go and help them. But people was like, no, I'm just gonna ignore the person who needs help because
Mm.
this is the Lord's money, because the Lord needs physical money, doesn't he? He does, to buy some McDonald's.
And that's like, even that particular example you just gave is even directly addressed by the Jesus character in the story, where they say, you know, should you heal the is it the
Yeah.
blind man or crippled man on the Sabbath? And you know, Jesus is like, you know, if you had a sheep that had fallen down, wouldn't you, you know, it was, you know, hurt or something, wouldn't you go rescue your sheep? And why can't I rescue a person? Isn't a person more invaluable? And it's amazing that, like, even when the Bible specifically addresses that issue, just the legalism that's constructed keeps them from even obeying the things that the Jesus character said. It's fascinating.
Exactly.
I did want to ask too, with since we're talking about women's roles and so forth,
Mhm.
how did that play out in terms of shame, like as you hit puberty? And I'm sure it's different for different, you know, girls in different churches, but did you feel ashamed of, when you hit puberty, did you feel ashamed of any desires? And did you feel ashamed of just thinking about sexuality? Or did it feel like that was healthier in your church?
It was seldom spoke about in the
Okay.
church. So um I felt like that was such an area I was doing it alone in. Um yeah, I felt a lot of desires, of course, especially in terms of, because I'm bisexual, so that was something I struggled with, and I thought something was wrong with me.
Hmm.
Yeah, I thought something was wrong with me because how that spoke about in the church. And yeah, so it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. Um, so I kept it to myself. So imagine, because I'm in a church and it says this is wrong, I just kept that completely to myself, and then it was just suppressed. And what happens when you just suppress something? Eventually it pops out at not the best time, doesn't it? So, I went through my challenges of that. All because I was told that who I am is sinful. And I just thought something must be wrong. And I literally, I went down that route of, no, people can't be born this way because God doesn't make mistakes. Because in this book that I'm told is written by God, it says this isn't right. So because it's not right, and if people are like that, then you weren't born that way. It was just a choice because God doesn't make mistakes. And it was, a mind, forgive my language, it was a mind fuck. It was horrible.
Hmm.
Horrible.
That's crazy. And it's crazy that, as you said, you went through it alone. A lot of people
Yeah.
I've
Loads
talked to have said that. It's either that, where you're like, you don't have any real preparation and you're just
of,
kind of like mentally fumbling around trying to figure out how it all works.
yeah.
Or it's, for a lot of people, it might be like a lack of information, but it's also often mixed with so many negatives, like, don't do this, don't you dare be caught alone with a guy. And you
Yeah.
get to a point where you feel like your desires are so bad that I've read a lot of stories and even talked to people who've said that when they finally did get married and they kind of finally had that green light to say, enjoy yourself, that they couldn't flip that switch because it's like, you can't say no, 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 bad, bad, bad 10,000 times. And then suddenly, just because there's a ring on your finger, suddenly say, enjoy yourself. Like, you just can't do that. And a lot of people struggle, I think some of them almost permanently, because it feels like they're so dirty.
That is exactly what I experienced with my marriage as well. And we're not together anymore, but I had a big issue. I couldn't, as you said, I couldn't flip that switch. They say do everything to the glory of the Lord. I just thought, how is this glorifying the Lord? And I just didn't allow myself to fully experience it, because I was just like, again, it was just a mind fuck, and it was like, oh, um, it just wasn't nice. It really wasn't nice, because I just thought, as a wife, I'm meant to be doing all of these things that I was told I should do, but how do we get past the thing that we've been told constantly? Stay away, don't touch about that. When it wasn't spoken about often. And again, when they did do like youth services and spoke about marriage and things like that, they just kept it as like, until you're married, just wait until you're married, you'll find that person. And they didn't really go into detail of what it should be like in a marriage neither, because I guess that was what I was expecting, because there's sermons for everything, to do this and do that. And it's like, well, what do you do in the marriage bed now? What happens? And yeah.
Yeah, and I think even in a maybe more generic sense, generic is probably the best word for it, but in a generic or broad sense, there's also just this concept that we're given a lot as Christians, that the flesh or the carnal nature is fighting against the spiritual nature. And so even if you would technically say, of course, intimacy in marriage is a good thing, number one, for having children and increasing the kingdom of God, hopefully, as you have Christian, kids that you raise as Christians. But then in addition, it keeps you pure. So, you're not tempted. It talks about, don't stop coming together apart from mutual consent for prayer, but otherwise you're going to be tempting each other if you hold back from each other. So protect each other. That way you're protecting the marriage. But in the context of those good messages, I guess good from their perspective, you're still kind of given this sense of like, but it's still kind of carnal. The reason you want to, for lack of a better phrase, screw like rabbits, is because there's a carnal nature in you that's against. And like, if you were spiritual, sex should kind of diminish in its value. And it even talks in Revelation about these people that are listed as just bastions of examples. And it talks about how they were virgins. They were virgins who, and they're listed as they were pure. And you're like, well, wait a second. Why does virginity equal purity? I thought if virginity is, if marriage is from God, then people who aren't virgins are also pure. But it's like, no. If you're a virgin, you're pure. Even, to the point where you're permanently a virgin. And it lifts this stuff up. Like, you shouldn't really care about sex that much, even as a young person. And certainly you should care about it less and less as you mature in the Lord. And it gets to a point where you think, now that I'm speaking now as someone who's on the other side of it, like, at what point do you just say to yourself, this is awesome. My desires are amazing. My body is amazing. The way it works is amazing. I love being me. I love being sexual. I love being erotic. I love connecting with other people on that level. And just to say, this is nothing but wonderful, a wonderful part of my experience. And you feel bad for people that never get that. Like, some people, you get the sense they don't spend a day of their lives. I mean, they may have had good intimacy with their marriage partner, but they've never spent a day of their lives just truly thinking in every way possible, this is fine, this is normal, this is good, this is healthy. It's healthy to dive into eroticism and sexuality. And I feel truly traumatized, most for other people, thinking some of you are going to go to your deathbed and never truly embrace your humanness. Does that resonate with you?
It does completely, because it's sad. I had to ask myself, like, would I be okay with how I was in the church for the rest of my life? And I just thought, no, not at all, because I got to a point, it's like, I want to do certain stuff and it's okay, it's fine to do it. And I'm glad I've kind of broken away from, the shackles, because
Hmm.
it's okay. It is okay. And I feel you, those who are still in it to the point where they're denying themselves, then I feel for them, because life is about living, it's about experiencing. And if you're stopping yourself from doing that, literally because someone else told you not to, and that's sad.
Hmm.
And then, you know, they believe it's God. But why does the Lord, why is he so interested in that? Has the Lord specifically said you can do this, this, and this? He hasn't, technically, like, but I remember, like, holding hands was an issue. Certain stuff, like, my pastor would say, I was scared to kind of say, oh yeah, I kissed my partner before getting married, in front of the pastor. So I lied and I was like, no, we haven't kissed yet. And it was a lie. Only all because I just thought, like, you're not meant to do nothing until you're married. So yeah. And then,
Yeah.
like I said, you go in the marriage, it's like, oh, green light.
And two of the consequences, I think of that are, number one, people that do cross those lines, they feel very dirty and sullied. They feel like they're kind of like a dirty rag that, you know, you're never going to get this rag clean again. But then also, I think it leaves people, or maybe I should say it originates from, but it certainly leads people back to this mentality of deny yourself now, because the more you deny yourself now, the better your rewards will be in heaven. And it's like, number one, when you realize there's no heaven, you're not going to get anything, because you're not going to go anywhere. But to realize people are spending their whole lives kind of thinking real life is up ahead, meaning when I die and I cross over to heaven, to Jesus, and maybe whatever version of true pleasure, like not dirty pleasure in their minds, but real pleasure. Like, God is a God of total pleasure, but pure pleasure. And so whatever pleasure I'm designed to experience, the more that I deny myself now of these kind of earthly, carnal, you know, filthy desires, the more I'm freeing myself up to be an open vessel to truly receive the Lord's blessing of the true pleasures of heaven. And you end up with this, I mean, that relates to a lot of areas of life. You end up with this mentality where people are just like, life's up ahead, life's up ahead. It's like, no, life is not up ahead. It is now. And you are not guaranteed tomorrow. Like, and you're not going anywhere when you die. Like, you got to keep, and it's sad, because again, people are literally wasting their lives over mythology.
Yeah, they are waiting to get to heaven.
Yeah. Well, before we get into your deconversion, I did want to dive a little bit deeper first into what I would call the good parts, so to speak, of your relationship with God. Can you tell me, you know, ignoring completely what happened that took you away from that, when you were just, say, in your room alone with God, you're not trying to cross off a to-do list and say, I have to spend 30 minutes in prayer, I have to read, 6 chapters of the Bible, I have to do this. You're just like in your bed at night, lights off, looking up, thinking, God, it's you and me against the world. You've redeemed me. I'm one of your children. The blood of Christ, I plead it. It's covering me. I'm in your family. And you're just thinking through life, not necessarily praying, but just in a worldview sense. It's just you and God having kind of like an open dialogue. And obviously we know at this point it's not a dialogue, it's a monologue, but you're having this dialogue with God. And there's an intimacy there, a beauty of like God's kind of sending messages. Maybe, it's, Kelita, it's going to be okay. I'm going to get you through this hardship, or I'm going to answer your questions. I'm going to make you grow. What were some of the sweet moments that you remember, or just the quiet times with God? What was that like for you?
So for me, I really liked, my favorite form of talking to God was actually just talking as a friend. So that's where I'd say I had my truest times. I had moments where I was intimate and I was like, say in prayer, and I'd cry and, all that stuff. But in terms of what I can say, genuinely, this is just true. I'm not doing it to ask for anything. I'm literally just talking. Was just when I was talking like he was my friend, and I'd say jokes. Like I'd say, you know what, this, and like literally like he was my best friend next to me.
Hmm.
And that was my favorite time, really, because I thought to myself, oh, even if I'm not alone, God's with me. And yeah, and I just talk. Obviously nothing's coming back, but um it was me being myself, my childish, jokey self. I'm talking about whatever I want. And yeah, I'd say that was my highlight.
Did you ever have that kind of mixed in with the context of appreciating creation? Kind of like if you were maybe talking to God while you're on a walk in the park and like it's sunset and like the sky just suddenly turns purple and orange and yellow and like God's almost like God set it up to send you a message like, Kelita, look, I'm the artist, I'm the creator. I'm putting this here just to get your, and did you ever kind of get in rapture even just looking at the stars at night?
Nature for me, if I'd walk and by myself and I'd talk to the flowers, I'd talk to the flowers. And I'd be like, oh, God made this flower. It's like, you made this beautiful. And I'd try and get lessons. Like, for example, I'd see weeds and then I'd see normal plants. And I'd say, oh, try not to be like the weed because they can easily be uprooted, but be something that, it's solid in the ground. So I'd have them little lessons for myself. And I'd say, I guess I'd say God told me that lesson on a nature walk, so to say. But absolutely is nature for me. That was my most time. And then I'd just talk like he's my friend.
Yeah, like it's a parable that he's put in front of you.
Yeah, that's it, a parable.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I know for me that was very similar. Just nature, the constant looking for the extra exquisite sunrises or sunsets or stars at night or beautiful moons or whatever, and constantly trying to sense the beauty. And I remember too thinking, I maybe we can get into evolution here shortly too, but I remember thinking at one point, evolution can't be true. It just can't be. Therefore, since God made it and he's not arbitrary, it's not like he's just like flinging marbles and hoping they land okay. He's designing it like he's the exquisite mastermind. He's not just powerful, he's exquisitely artistic and he's overwhelmingly brilliant. And so he's doing, and he's obviously omniscient, and so he knows what's going to happen and so forth. So he is setting up things and events and people and time in a way that is itself like, just like we'd say, oh, the sunset is beautiful. We'd say, well, the sunset of a life is beautiful, like the things he orchestrates to do in certain parts of your life. And so I would almost try to correlate it and say, there's nothing arbitrary. Like the reason he made a certain kind of bird that way, or a certain animal, or the way the mountains look, or the way the seasons work, it's probably designed to tell us about God, our future in heaven, or something about the gospel. One of those three, most likely. And so I was always trying to push the antithesis of anti-evolution, so to speak, of saying, what is God saying about life through this part of nature? And I was just, it was like enrapturing to try to constantly look for the messages and say, God, what do you have for me? Not that I would have equated it with the Bible's message, but I would have just said like, it's almost like a hidden code. Like if you C.S. Lewis, he talks about at one point, like people say, I don't see God, where is he? And it says something to the point of like, what if God actually did write to us, and it's just in letters that are too big for us to see, but like you're looking at this little, like the little dot of an eye, and all you see is a dot. You're like, there's nothing there but a dot. But if you were to have eyes to see, so to speak, like divine eyes, you'd look back and say, oh, that's part of a whole big word. God did actually write, himself into nature, and constantly trying to figure out how to get rid of the earthly mentality, earthly worldview, and fix my eyes on Jesus in every way possible. It enraptured me.
Yeah.
On that note, what was your teaching in the church about evolution?
It was, you know, just God made the world. God made the world, and whenever kind of evolution was brought up, it was shut down and just says clearly that wasn't the case, because you can clearly see the design of God everywhere and stuff like that. It was, yeah, not much attention was put on it because the most of the people there just believed in God, wasn't it? So, and even if it was an event where outsiders were coming in, the preachers who I heard personally, again, it was more mocked. It was just like that obviously wasn't the case, you know, because God made everything. And I've said that before. I'm like, you know, I'm hearing like a nature documentary and it's like, oh, 30 million years old. And I'm just like, the world isn't that old. It's like, it's not that old. It's 6,000 plus years, because obviously counting the genealogy from Adam, it's like 6,000 plus years. And I'd say that so confidently, so confidently. And that's how many people are in the church now, because, well, you know, how they said it. They're
like
just
mocking scientists.
Yeah, just so confident. It's like, no, God said this, and that's the end of the story. So, yeah.
Did you, as you kind of moved past that, and as you grew up and you learned more and more in, you know, school or whatever, did it scare you at all, ever, like to realize some of those things that you had thought were definitely false, so to think, and I know this is probably getting into maybe parts of your story, but to think maybe that part is true, or maybe this, and just like, or even just the idea of a common ancestor, or how things, you know, evolved. Like if someone said, you know, this kind of bear evolved from that. Did anything ever shock you and like unsettle your spirit as you got into science?
Well, during school, I just ignored it. I
Okay.
ignored it. Like, I just was like, well, I know this isn't the case because God made everything. When I say I was just stubborn, I'm a Taurus, so I can just be like, no, that's not it. And yeah, I ignored it. And I do remember even challenging my science teacher, me and a few other girls, and he was getting so frustrated with us. He was just like, if God wasn't real, then he wouldn't let my mother suffer. And I was just like, that's sad, but God's still real though. So yeah, I was so stubborn that them things didn't faze me. If I heard it at all, it was just like, no, I'll ignore that because God made the earth.
Yeah.
You know, it's clear.
It's amazing how that stuff just shuts your mind down. I was very, very much totally the same. There was no reason to talk about most of those topics because I already knew what the answer was, and it's just amazing. Well, could you then tell us anything more about kind of the good parts of like the high point of your relationship with God, and then start to take us over the whatever the would want to call it, take us over the high point to where it began to see some cracks in the wall?
So I'd say the high point when I was like deep in the church now, it was more or less like my duty and what I was doing. That's where I felt it was like my high point at this point, because in terms of like my personal relationship, it was how it was. I was at the phase where I was really just trying to do what was expected of me, you know, study for this long and do all that. So I didn't enjoy that bit, but it was just the fellowship. I done my best. I wanted to get the message of the Lord out there. So being a youth leader, I was like, you know, youth, let's go to New Year's Eve. We can go out, don't go clubbing, but we can go out and give out the Great Controversy books. That's what I wanted to do. And I was so determined. I was so passionate about it. And yeah, so it's like doing stuff like that was my highlight, so to say. It was working to get the message out there. But church is a business, isn't it? So a simple thing of, come on, let's just get some books and hand it out. they had to have a board meeting for it. They had to do all this stuff and meetings after meetings. And I didn't that was the frustrating part. I was like, I don't understand. The Lord just wants us to go and spread his word. Why are we having a business meeting? Just give us the books and let us go. So I had a lot of issues with the business side of the church. So that was cracks for me as well, where I was just like, no, I don't like this. Yeah.
Did that ever tempt you to just say, I'm in the wrong denomination? Like, maybe I shouldn't be Seventh-day Adventist. Maybe if I were in a Baptist church, I'd be in a better fit? Or
See, because the Seventh-day Adventists thought we were the chosen church, and all of the lessons and Ellen G. White, I was just so convinced that no, this is God's church. So I just was like, nah, especially if it wasn't a Sabbath keeping church. I was like, definitely not, because Sunday is the mark of the beast. Sunday is the mark of the beast. Then Sabbath is the true day. And then I had at one point thought to kind of look at other Sabbath keeping ones, but it was just too much out of my comfort zone. I was like, no, Seventh-day Adventism.
Well, I meant to ask about that idea. Did they think that other Christians were just gravely mistaken but still Christians, or not Christians at all?
They thought that they were still Christians, because they went off the verse where Jesus says, I have sheep in other folds, flock in other folds. So they knew that there's many people even outside of the church who would be saved, basically, but they believed that theirs was like the true one, the true church. So
if you really wanted to follow God and honor God and have the closest to the truest interpretation, you'd be a Seventh-day Adventist.
Yeah. You would baptize into
That's
that.
fascinating. I feel like I could dive into a whole bunch of topics. I don't want to take us off your story, but that's really interesting. And I don't know how many other churches would have phrased it quite that way. Other denominations would have said, we're the true church. But even if they wouldn't have said the words, I think a lot of people would get that sense, like, we are doing things the most biblical way, the most rational way, maybe. Just like, look, like, for example, if you're in a church that never baptizes babies, like they only baptize you when you're at the age of accountability or higher, they're like defending it tooth and nail, like, of course you can't baptize babies. Baptism is about, you publicly declared your faith in Christ, and now you're going to back it up with his public demonstration, saying, yes, I'm identifying personally with the death, when you go under the water, the death and resurrection. And of course, someone else, and they'd fight, never ever sprinkle. It's always dunking. Baptizing is dunking all the way under. And they'll fight on that hill till kingdom come, and pun intended. But then they'll other groups are like, they'll fight tooth and nail about, well, you do need to baptize babies because God circumcised babies in the Old Testament. Like, those babies weren't declaring their faith. God had you circumcise them at 8 days old. There's no way they were professing their faith in Yahweh. So why would you wait for? And it's just, everybody has got their little spin on it and thinking we are being most honoring to the precious message of God. It's amazing. The arrogance and what's the word? Hubris, I think. It's amazing.
Yeah. And it's just like the Seventh-day Adventist Church, though they claim that, you then have the Hebrew Israelites, who they still they do all of the worships, they do all of the they celebrate all of, what are they called?
Like the festivals and
so they do as well as the Sabbath, they'll anything mentioned in the Old Testament basically still keep.
Okay.
And you've got different spins on it, as you said, because it's like, did Jesus not say you don't have to do that stuff anymore? So what's right? What's more biblical? Is it those who follow more of the New Testament or more of the Old, or both? But you see, each to their own. Yes.
Yeah. And I'll just say, to wrap that part up, is I love the idea that when you're out, you can begin to list things that just don't matter. Like, so many of these topics, in terms of should I, go left or right here? Should I pick column A or column B? But even just, it's not like which one is better or more biblical. It's like it never mattered. Like, should you dunk a baby, or should you baptize only at the age of accountability or older, or should you baptize babies? It doesn't matter. Like, it's just, you might as well say, does God really, really, really want me to wear a blue shirt or a green shirt today? Like, that question is irrelevant. There's no God. So the question of which shirt does he want is just, it's a non-issue. Wear the one you want. And the end times is a huge one we touched on earlier, but all this questions, I don't know if your church would do this, but there were endless debates in the churches I was involved with is regarding how will the end times work out? Meaning, will we go through the tribulation? Or is God going to rapture us first? Like all the Christians who are alive when Christ comes back, they're going to go up to heaven, and then the tribulation starts. So we won't see it. And other Christians were like, no, we're going to go through the tribulation. Absolutely, we're going to go through the tribulation. And people would fight and split churches over it. I'm like, you're literally like losing relationships that you've maybe had for decades over a question that is truly as fantastic as like, is Spider-Man better than Superman? Like, it's mythology. It doesn't matter. And it's just blows my mind, the things that used to in Rapture. And, people, they'll spend years reading endless commentaries on this stuff. Like, you've wasted your life reading commentaries to figure out when Christ is coming back and whether the tribulation is going to happen before or after. Like, it's not reality. It's mythology. I need to do some presentations on that, because it's big on my mind a lot, talking about those things that just, they never mattered. And I think it's, in one sense, it's like we're mocking it, or mocking our old selves. But in another sense, I think there's a good reason to go through what we used to believe, like step by step, line by line, and kind of have a funeral for it. Say, put it to bed. Like, if I never identified this particular bad idea, I'm going to identify it and I'm going to kill it. I'm going to put it to death right now. The idea that sex was dirty, I'm going to put it to bed. The idea that Christ is coming back and I better be ready, put it to bed. It's these topics have to end. And a lot of them have deep roots where some of us, we're out and we're still dealing with issues of worth, or we talk about people being afraid of hell still. If you believe in hellfire, like, they'll still wake up in the middle of the night in a sweat, like, oh, what if I'm wrong? I'm going to burn. It's like, it's time to slowly identify every little thing that these mythologizing people taught you and undo it, like unlearn what you've learned, to borrow from Yoda in Star Wars, unlearn what you've learned and start over, clearing that slate as much as you can. Well, what happened in your story to begin to further those cracks about the church and the red tape?
So I began to actually acknowledge the questions that had come up before. So I had just questions, even from a child, like, why did God create Satan? What was the point of it all? Why why put a tree there? Why do all of these things? So them questions that popped up as a child, as a teenager, I then actually acknowledged. Now I actually started to ask. I was like, why? What is the point of all this? We're told this character is omnipresent, he's everything, he can do anything. So why are we in this predicament of sin if you can do everything? And that's where it started to get deeper. I was like, these things, it doesn't make sense. When I started to question, I realized because at this point, I'd slowed down in going to church. So I wasn't going anymore. I wasn't getting that constant programming every week. So it was easier for me to acknowledge these questions now. But I still believed in it. I still, like, 100%. I just wasn't going to church because I wasn't happy at the time. And
can I ask, did you have people you could ask those questions to, or were you just saying you were just like you and God were talking about it?
It was me. I was asking it for myself, and then I was asking it like to my partner at the time. But mainly myself. Any topics in terms of, say, other books in the Bible and stuff, if I was to bring that up in the church, it was just like we don't touch them. They're not of the, they're not in the Bible for a reason, so we don't touch them. And it was just left alone. And that was another question that come back up for myself. I was like, we're told, isn't there a verse? It says, come, let us reason together. Come, let us reason together. So, but when I'm coming with like something to discuss, it's shut down. No, we don't touch that. We don't touch it. And that was the question for a few things.
Where they'll have an answer for you, but it's a really bad answer.
It's a bad answer. Yeah, it's just a terrible answer. It's like, this isn't good enough. It's not good enough. And these things, it came back and I'm like, okay, no, what are in these other books? So I started to read some of the other books.
So you're talking now like about the Apocrypha and the Deuterocanonical books?
Yes.
Like Enoch and Jubilees and that kind of stuff, Maccabees?
Yes, Jubilees, Maccabees. And then you had, Enoch, the Adam and Eve story.
Life of Adam and Eve, yeah.
Life of Adam and Eve, just them. So I started to read the Adam and Eve one first, and that one, it opened my eyes. I was like, okay, it's a different level. I was like, okay, this is showing God in a different light now. It's like the Bible's just, it's so condensed in, the period of time when they were alive. And to think about it, being the first humans meant to be, why is there so little about them? Like so little. So reading that, it made me think like, okay, it deepened my relationship with God, because I was like, I see him now more as a father who is trying to explain to them and to teach them this is how to, live.
Because of what you read in that book, The Life of Adam and Eve? Yeah.
Because supposedly they died several times. They just kept dying because they kept killing themselves because they didn't know certain things. And then God brought them back to life. And then he told them. And I was just like, at the time, I was like, wow, this is amazing. It makes sense now. That's how they knew all this stuff. And but then I just went into more books, more questions came up, and I was just like, this does not make sense. Like each question, I went to another question, and it just didn't make, it wasn't logical. It really wasn't logical. None of it. And they say, oh, the only thing, like, why does God have to sacrifice his son to defeat sin? Why not just wipe sin out? Why did he kill so many people in a certain ways? Why didn't he can just click his fingers and their breath would have been gone without no pain, no suffering? So why not do that all the time when he was destroying his enemies? But no, he literally he told people to go and take even babies who's feeding and kill them. And then he was upset when they didn't kill all the animals. Yeah. And he gave, was it Saul? He gave him the silent treatment because he didn't kill the animals. So Saul had to go back because he thought, let me sacrifice them. I'll keep them as sacrifices. He thought that would have been pleasing to him, but no. And to me, I was like, that's a bit petty, Lord. Yeah.
And then petty. Samuel, I think the priest at that time, he comes and I think he also left, Saul left the King Agag alive. And I think King Agag thought he was going to be like the one person of his area that survived because they were going to like honor him or something. Oh, it's the king, let him live, or, rot in prison. And Samuel comes and it says he hacks him to pieces in front of the people. And it's like, oh my, I mean, I know some of that's, astrotheological, but just the way it's written, it's amazing.
Exactly.
You're bringing up another good point too, and this is related to canonicity, but how do we know that the books that are given to us are the right ones? And how do we know that there aren't multiple versions of the originals and which one of those versions is the right one? And then how do we know that they've been preserved correctly, meaning someone didn't have a book that maybe everyone did agree is from God at some point, or at least eventually it ended up that way. But then over time, they shifted the narrative a little bit and added some things to clarify. Like maybe there was like a version 1 and now we've got version 5 or 10 of it. And if we saw version 1, we'd be like, wait a second, there's some really important things that we've been praying about and honoring God over that in version 10, but in version 1 they're not even here. Like, are they important or aren't they? And like, is that part of what you're talking about, like, just asking some of those questions?
Yeah, it didn't. It's like, the book Thomas,
The Gospel of Thomas.
Gospel of Thomas. When I read that one, I was like, wow, this is a complete different light. I'm sure it's a Gospel of Thomas. And I'm like, the way Jesus is talking in here, it's like completely different to the four Gospels, and the messages he was saying. I was like, who is this person? So that completely confused me. That was where I felt like, say, deeper into the rabbit hole. And the Gnostics, their version of Christianity, I was like, whoa, there's a whole different perspective on this, even to the point these people were saying that the Lord is evil. They says the Lord is evil. I'm like, wow. I was like mind blown then. And I was like, you know what? If I'm resonating with anything, it's along the lines of the Lord is a monster. Like I said in my video, he's a monster and he's evil. Like,
Meaning Yahweh as opposed to Jesus.
Yeah. So I was just like, with what he's doing in here, this is an evil character. He's not a nice character. And then it's like, when I come into like the Gospel of Thomas and everything, I was like, wow, was this meant to be part of the Bible? Was it? And then there's loads. There's like Mary, the Gospel of Mary. Supposedly Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene as well, and had children, supposedly. So I'm like, what is this? Where did they find all these books? Whose idea was it to put just 66 in this one? And then like the Ethiopian Bible has 88 or 80. Whose idea was that? Which one is right? Other Bibles have more. Supposedly there's extra books. Who was behind it all?
Yeah. And I agree with the Mary Magdalene thing. He was called in the Gospels that we have in the canon. He's called Rabbi many times, and he never corrects him and says, no, don't call me Rabbi. Well, Jewish rabbis would absolutely have had to be married, and hopefully having lots of kids. That was almost like that was just a given. Like there were even, I remember as a Christian hearing, I think they even said it like a joke, like hell is filled with Gentiles and Jews who haven't gotten married. And like, it was like I don't know how seriously they took that, but it was a serious deal. Like, you couldn't be a revered teacher of the law if you weren't married. And so for Jesus to be called a rabbi and never pushing back and saying, no, I'm not a rabbi, is telling. He very likely, if there was a character there, I personally lean more towards he is a parable. At the moment, I'm trying to figure it out, but I think the original story was probably just a parable. He was a parable of Israel, and that his story, like when you look at his story and what he does, it looks like it lines up very closely with what Israel's story was. And I think the Jesus character is like a retelling of Israel's history. But regardless of whether or not that's what happened, if there was a Jesus character, he very likely did have a wife. Yeah, totally agree. And Paul as well.
Exactly. And then that brings me back to like purity culture and sin and everything, because automatically, because he's the son of God and we're told, it was a virgin birth and he didn't have a wife. He just, 33 years and he died on a cross sacrifice. It's like automatically, how am I going to reach to that level? Because it wasn't for a virgin birth that I've come about, so automatically it's like it's set at a level that I can't reach. And because we were told he didn't have a wife and everything, it's like when being married and doing all that, it's like, well, Jesus didn't do this, so you can't even ask what would Jesus do in the situation, because we wasn't told. And it's literally just standards like that. But like you said, him being a rabbi, but if that fact was to be brought up, how many people would accept it because it's so ingrained as he hasn't had a wife and he's pure, he was spotless, without blame. And, you know, they missed the part as well. He supposedly killed a child accidentally when he was young. It was an accident, but he done it.
I think some of them may have been on purpose.
Uh,
And so the infancy gospel you're talking about?
oh,
yeah, I think some of them were, some of the kids pissed him off and he killed him. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So there you go. But because that's missed, you know, it's not mentioned, it's like this spotless, sinless person. And then again, all the missing years of his life, where was he supposedly? I went on research and then they said he was here, there, and everywhere. And it's like, well, that's him going into other cultures, other religions, other, you know, but that's something we're told you can't do that. You stay in your box. So maybe that's why that part of the parable was missed out, you know? Yeah.
And it's, I love what you're getting into there, and there's so many levels of that. Part of it is, I think, very astrotheologically related, especially when you get into, you know, him starting at age 30, having exactly 12 disciples. You're starting to get into the constellations and the zodiac there. But regardless of what they had in mind, it is fascinating. And the idea too that there were historians all over the place at that time who said nothing about Jesus. It says in the Gospels, he did so much that you couldn't fill the world with the books that would catalog descriptions of what he did. Like, so he turned the world upside down, and not a single historian of that time wrote anything about him. Like, that doesn't make sense.
No.
Doesn't make any sense. When you look at that, one issue that comes up a lot with the canonicity question is, it seems to be always men making the decisions. Both men pretty much writing all these books. Obviously, people could argue that maybe certain books were not, you know, were written by women and we just didn't know. I think I've heard it argued that the Gospel of John might have been written by a woman, Mary Magdalene or someone. But regardless of conjecture, they're described to us as written by men, and then the people who decide which books get in and which versions of the books are men. You know, these church councils, it's always men leading the church. And I know we've talked about the gender roles a little bit, but did it strike you at all thinking it's always men getting the message, it's always men making the decision? The word that's coming to my mind is patriarchy. Did it ever strike you that this is potentially a play for men to keep power?
I definitely didn't think of it in that way at the time, but looking back at it, I can say what I felt. I definitely felt like I was just a shadow, and I felt like I was a shadow, and I wasn't recognized. Like, it was just my partner. It was like, what he's doing, I'm to support him.
You're his helper.
Yeah. I was there to help him meet God, help me, you know. And that was it. And of course it was men deciding everything. Like, in my church, they did have women on the board. But no, when it came to it, was preachers, there wasn't any preachers. The odd time women preachers came, it was very rare. Or if just a member of the church said, okay, I'm going to give a sermon today. But it's mainly men. When it was more of like a, you know, this is a sacred service, whatever we're going to do, it was mainly men. Like, I remember it's like, oh, this is a special time. It was just 4 men up on the platform, and it wasn't Men's Day. It was only like, if it was Women's Day, then yeah, it was all women up there. But yeah, men, you know, it was a man, the pastor come and decided that women can't go on the platform anymore with trousers. So it was a man who decided that. Yeah.
As you began to move away from the church and from Christianity, and you began to realize that patriarchy was part of it, did that feel freeing at all for you as a woman?
Completely. Like, totally. You know, I just felt, like I said, in a shadow. I felt in a shadow, like my voice wasn't really heard. and I did my best. Like I said, I was in there. When I'm passionate about things, I can be vocal. So I was passionate about my great controversy books and handing them out. And but no, nothing really happened. And whether or not that was because I was female, I don't know, but definitely what I've experienced is I noticed I was just a shadow, and it was my partner who was seen, like literally to the point I wasn't greeted. It was just him who was greeted. When they knew I was with him, that's when I had attention. And yeah, that was just not nice. It's like, oh, and then now, like the odd time I'd still go back to church if there's like a funeral or something. And one was a couple weeks ago, I went back and someone's like, do I know you? It's like, you look familiar, do I know you? And I was just like, I don't know, either from online or from church, I don't know, but I just left it at that. But most likely it's because I was just someone's shadow before. They just saw me in the background and paid no attention, and now I'm just there by myself, and they're like, do I know you? You look familiar.
Like your identity was wrapped up in being so-and-so's wife.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I know in my notes here, I wanted to touch on a couple more issues too about your just things you thought through. Noah's Ark, did that come up? I think I saw in one of your videos Noah's Ark came up as one of your topics of interest.
Yeah, so when I moved past the creation story, the Noah's Ark again, it just didn't make sense. It did not make sense where, we didn't believe it was like the animals went on 2 by 2, it was 7. So whether or not, I don't know what the reason for it being 7 is. Is it because I just like the number 7? Is that complete? Or was it, I don't know if that was meant to be because the animals needed to eat, but would that have been enough to keep them for that length of time? I don't know. It's illogical. It's really illogical. How did God get all the animals into one place? How did they all fit in there? What were they eating? Where did their waste go?
And it was probably like a small rainstorm at first so that he could get all the animals on first, except for like the ones in Australia. And then he kind of took the boat over and got the kangaroos and the koala bears. And then the flood started.
And then it happened, every animal, it doesn't make sense. But as a child, you just believed it. It's like, oh, the animals went on 2 by 2, hurrah. And you just accept it.
Had they told you about the Epic of Gilgamesh as a child?
No, not as a child. I learned that when I was doing my own research. I was like, oh, so this has happened before. And, it's happened other times as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wasn't taught that.
And again, continuing just through a short list here of topics that I've seen from your channel, the question of why does God want to be praised and worshiped? How did that relate to, or what did you think through as you started to ask that question?
Because I thought if someone or something is omnipresent, omnipotent and omnipresent, you're in need of nothing, like nothing. So why do you want this constant praise and worship? And then, some people had argued like, oh, he doesn't really need it. However, when we're told when we go to heaven, we're told we'll be worshiping and praising him forever. That's literally what we're told. So he does want it, in the whole narrative. So why does someone who is in need of nothing want praise and worship? It doesn't make sense unless it's to feed his ego. And then if he's feeding his ego, then he doesn't deserve to be a god. He don't deserve to be a god.
Yeah.
So
well, I think what you're saying there gets into a really big issue too of just this Yahweh character, which is where this all starts from. The Lord that we're talking about is Yahweh. His character, and I'm going to ignore for a moment just the actual like historical parts and archaeological parts where he's the son of Elyon and Asherah, and he's one of the children, and then he becomes the same as Elyon, so he's married to Asherah, and then they take Asherah out. But ignoring that, just taking at face value what it says about him in the Bible, his character really is presented as a nitpicky narcissist psychopath. I mean, he's a God who says, I will love you endlessly if you love me back, but if you don't love and obey me back, I will kill you and torture you forever. And my love is unconditional, but it's completely conditional at the same time. I'll kill. And if you do disobey me, my requirement to make things right is blood. So even if you don't die, you've got to kill something. And I require, like you said, I require you to go in and kill other people instead of, a guy could have just orchestrated it so that the promised land, when the people of Israel were moving up toward it, he could have just orchestrated history so that land was just empty. There probably were other parts of the planet at that time that were pretty wide open and empty. God could have easily had the Canaanites or whoever they were, the way I know that the Jewish people were, from Egypt and became part of Canaan themselves, the Canaanites. But in terms of just like, he could have had, the way the story is written, he could have had the Canaanites over somewhere else in another part of the world, or, further north, further south. He could have had that section of the land of Israel empty so that he said, is this my gift? And you can walk in, because now you've got these people, to these soldiers and even young teenagers, who they had to go in and start their time in the promised land by slaughtering. I mean, what kind of nightmares would it give to, a 15-year-old boy to have thought, yes, I honored God, but I had to watch myself take a sword and a knife and cut people open and put a sword through a mother and her nursing baby and burn their house down. The nightmares of the warfare that would bring, God could have eliminated all of that by just leaving that land vacant. And he didn't. They had to slaughter things. And you get, and of course, circumcision, why would God want to cut off the end of a little boy's penis? The vacillations, the craziness, and then the bizarre stuff like God's like, I'm all powerful, but that group over there has chariots of iron or whatever, bronze, so we can't beat them because their chariots are strong. So he's powerful, but he's not. And you get this really, really strong sense that this guy is a narcissistic psychopath. And the things that he says about himself and in the relationship with Israel, if a real person said it to, if I said it to my wife, you'd be in trouble with the law. If you said you love me back, but I will slaughter you, you go to prison for that, obviously, even just the threat of it, if you really meant it. And yet we are like, but God's so wonderful. Did it strike you as weird that when we were Christians, that we couldn't see how bad this character was?
Yeah, like that. I went for a phase where I was just like, Kelita, how did I not see this? It's narcissistic, it's abusive, and like I said, it's justified. And then anytime that's brought up, it's just told, no, God is love. God would never do that. God is love. Love is God. God is love. And like literally that is it, blanket sweep. But it's narcissistic. And I feel that because we accept that character and all the behaviors, that's why we accept other things in our life, and we stay in situations for longer when we shouldn't, whether that's at work and an employee is, it's just not nice, narcissistic, and in how they're going on. It's like we're so used to suffering and we accept it, especially because this God, how he is making us do it. So we feel we have to suffer in our life, and it becomes normal, and all the stuff we shouldn't put up with becomes normal because we've been taught this. And I feel, don't get me wrong, it's not like taught, oh, he does this, he does that. But because we're reading it and we're told this is the truth, and we're told that that's how it's accepted, we then accept it unintentionally in our own life. And that's what I feel is really bad. It's really bad.
It's a good point about the suffering too, about we kind of set ourselves up to put up with suffering thinking we're doing it for God's glory. Exactly. And instead we're doing it because we don't want to take the bravery to move on from a bad situation. And that's true. It's hard stuff. Well, as you were going through this, as you're kind of taking a step by step closer toward your actual deconversion, what was the hardest part of those final steps? Like what was the part that just ripped your heart apart? Any
Um,
topics or experiences or ways people were treating you?
it was, for me, what hit me the hardest of like when leaving was God killing children and babies.
Okay.
I was once I accepted that, I was
Yeah.
like, I'm done. That is one of my videos. It's on like 30K views now, shockingly.
Yeah.
Um,
So the genocide, slaughter
yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
genocide. I was just like, no. And this was after obviously having my son was born then, and I was just like, it doesn't make sense to me. All the things that he done, even killing like the firstborn in Egypt, telling Abraham to sacrifice his son for a test. I'm just like, it's silly. Like, I'm sorry, no matter how anyone for a test, that is sick. It's sick and
Yeah.
it's messed up in the head, you know. But people say, oh no, he wasn't really gonna let him kill him. But why do that as a test? If I'm giving a test to someone, I'm not gonna say to show your loyalty to me, you need to prove that you're gonna take someone else's life. That's disgusting and it's messed up.
Yeah.
It's really bad. But unfortunately, many people have commented on that video. It's just like, no, the Lord's not like that. It was just a test. He was only testing him, and the Lord is good and he's love, and the Lord would never kill. That's what some people have said. They said he would never kill. Please show me where he's killed children. And I'm like, do people not see this?
Yeah.
Because it's there.
Like they don't even read their own Bible.
They don't. They don't read it. And like I says, that I didn't see any of this while I was in the church. And because you're blinded, you're completely blinded. It's only being out of it. It's just like, nah, this is it. And then even though I'd done that video, I feel what crushed me like on a level, it was like, oh, was just the allegory verse in Galatians saying that it was an allegory. And then
Sarah and Hagar.
Yeah, it crushed my whole reality, because I was like, wow, even if I thought he was a monster, he could have still been doing that stuff being a monster, but now that, and I've read that verse many times, but now I was at the point of accepting what it said. I was like, it's an allegory, because if that part of the story is an allegory, the whole thing, it messes everything up. And I went into my shower and I was just like, I was experiencing anger, sadness, frustration, because I was like, I don't know what this is. I've given my whole life to this thing. And even the book says it's a story. So it's not, it was a part that wasn't taken away. It was still there.
Yeah.
And it was crushing, because you've given so much of yourself to something that's not real. And that it's sad. So it was horrible.
It is. I was going to just add one thing about the genocide where he says go in and kill everybody.
Yeah.
There was one silver lining to it. And I say this tongue in cheek, of course. He did say, to these men, I imagine, with big beards and big swords covered in blood and all that. He did say that they could, if they found some virgin girls, they could spare those, keep those with them. So, there's a silver lining. This is the best. This is the best we can come up with for our God.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Well, take us over what's the pinnacle of the story. What was the last few steps like, and tell us what happened when you actually deconverted.
So, I'd say my last step was openly putting it on YouTube. That was like, I was open, I wasn't part of it anymore. And
I mean, like, just mentally, like internally before then, what was there a day or a week where you just kind of said to yourself privately first, I'm like, maybe you were afraid to say it before, but like, I'm going to say it now, I'm out, I'm done. Like, what was that part of it like privately?
It was emotional. And I just said, I was like to myself, I don't know. I was like, it's too much in my head. I was like, I don't know what's going on. And I thought that the best thing to do was, until I know what's going on, know where I stand with it, was to just take a step back. And I says, I didn't want to do this. And I kind of almost, when I kind of said that, I almost swayed back into it, because I thought, you know what, maybe shall I give it one more try? One more try. And then something my friend had said at the time is I wasn't going to go to a wedding of someone who was close to them because it was on the Sabbath day. And I was like, well, I'm going to the wedding. I'm going. And I remember before, when I was like deeper into it, I missed a wedding where I was invited because it was on the Sabbath day. And I was planning to go, but I was made to feel guilty. Oh, you're going on a wedding on the Sabbath? It's the Lord's day. So I didn't go. I went to the after part, after Sabbath, but I missed the most important bit. But rewind, well, fast forward now. When they had said, oh, they're not going, I was like, I can't deal with the mental baggage anymore. I was like, I'm done. I was like, this is like completely, because I don't want to feel guilty for going to a wedding to celebrate love just because it's on a Saturday. I was like, no, I'm fed up of this. And I said, I'm not going back. And I've not been back since. So that was it for me. That was it. I was like, no, it was the mental. I'm glad that I recognized that I didn't want to deal with the mental guilt and stress anymore. So
what was it like realizing, okay, was there a particular day that you remember where you just kind of said to yourself, I don't think this is true? And like, how did that impact you, whether it was a day or a week or whatever? How did that impact you in terms of the things that you had thought were part of your worldview, the future of heaven, the seeing people who had died and already gone on to be with the Lord, the rewards in heaven, all that stuff, people who were sick that, you thought that they're going to have a glorified body someday, just the idea of eternity, you're going to live forever and ever and ever and ever. What kind of things began to hit you, and what was that loss like?
I can't really pinpoint a day where I thought exactly this. It was like a spread. It was like a spread. But honestly, it was emotional in terms of feeling angry that it was just all a lie, but it was a relief. Like in the back, it was just like, oh, so I don't have to go on the way I was going on. It was a big relief. To be honest, I felt like the best way I can describe Christianity for me at every stage, I felt restricted, just restricted. I couldn't do this, couldn't do that for whatever reason. So learning this now, it's like that restriction was lifted off me. So yeah, I just had to deal with the anger. I had a lot of anger. Yeah, I was angry. I was angry at the church. I was angry at God, I was like, can't really be angry at him, really. But yeah, I was angry.
I would just add to that, I was also angry at myself when I went through that, because it was that thought of, I should have known better. And like you mentioned, the genocide stuff, that was where it started for me. But that didn't even remotely get me close to deconversion in one sense. I had to do the digging into truly like deeply understanding the dying and rising God motif, knowing that there were like Christian apologists will say, oh, Jesus was so different. And, you kind of get that glance over, like, don't look behind the curtain. It's all fine. Jesus is so different. But once I dug in deeper, like, no, actually there's a lot of motifs that carry over. Learning that his stories were heavily copied from, like you mentioned, the book of Enoch and Jubilees. And that's just off the charts crazy how I don't understand. And this is a quick aside, but I keep on getting shocked that Christians aren't in the book of Enoch. Like I know some Christians are, but Protestant Christians, it baffles me. I'm working on a project to document how many times it's quoted in the New Testament. It's at least 100 quotes. I'm like, how can you not know that and care about the book of Enoch? It's Jesus is quoting it all over the place. Paul is, it just does. Anyway, it's an aside. It's a bit of a soapbox, but if you're a Christian, you haven't read the book of Enoch, that does not add up. It just doesn't. Enoch's all over your Bible, the Old Testament too, but New Testament for sure. But anyway, it took me that, but then also realizing that a lot of the stories are copied not just from Enoch and Jubilees and Maccabees, but from Homer, from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, from Euripides' Bacchae. That was shocking to me. And then realizing there were Pythagorean references several times in the New Testament, and then realizing that it's quoting other philosophers, and like not just in that section of Acts where it clearly says like Paul's quoting from different philosophers, that I knew about, but it's just woven in like throughout the text in ways that you think it's Paul, you think it's Jesus saying it, and it's not. It's Plato, it's Socrates, it's someone else. Realizing that they basically, in terms of our current way of describing it, they plagiarized. They wouldn't have described it that way. They would have said, we're just taking existing theology and philosophy and we're enhancing it. We're taking it to the next level. It's kind of like if someone had a Star Wars movie and then someone else took some themes from it. They probably get sued now by Lucasfilm. But if you could imagine that there was a world where you could do it without being sued, where you take major motifs of Star Wars and create a whole new storyline that to people that read it would say, oh, you took Star Wars and you made it so much better. We can see where you copied from, but this is not Star Wars. This is a new story, but it's not. It's kind of the old same thing, but better. It's twists and turns, and clear line of sight to the original story, but a better version of it. To see that they're doing that with Odysseus in the Odyssey over and over and over. The mythology, and then the dying and rising God, and then learning about the mystery cults, how they would do this stuff where they were already looking at, you get initiated by being baptized into the mystery cult, and you get to do a communal meal of bread and wine, or bread and beer, and then you get called brother and sister. It's like they were doing this stuff for hundreds of years before Christianity, and to realize that this stuff truly, this isn't just not reality, it's truly at the level of mythology. Like we're not, and I would have never guessed that I would have realized that was what it was, but this is at the level of, Ra and Thor and Zeus and, all these other guys. We are talking about Christianity actually being at its core mythology. And once that hit me, the genocide should have hit me, the land theft, the child brides, it should have hit me. But once I got the mythology down, I was like, shoot, this isn't real. That's what got me. But to get back to the point, I was angry at myself thinking genocide should have been sufficient to get me out. It's like, why was I? And I chalk it up to brainwashing. I'm like, brainwashing did its job, but I was still pissed off at myself. Like, yeah, but brainwashing, whatever. You should have known better. You're not stupid. You should have been able to see this. Why would a God want to cut off little boys' penises? Why, like you said, why can't God kill Satan instead of Jesus? Why did he have to put the tree there? It just doesn't add up on so many levels. And I was kind of pissed off at myself for that. How did you get over that anger at the whole situation and other people?
I got over it by accepting it for what it is. It's just, this is the case. I recognize that I can't be angry at the pastors, because do they know the truth? Or what are they taught? Are they taught that no, it's not true, it's theology, and then they're just like mythology, and then they're choosing to bring it off? I know some of them are like that, some of them do, and I can't say any of the ones I personally know do. From my own site, they seem genuine, but I went down that road like, if any pastor's done that, how could they purposely know it and then do it? And
as if they're charlatans, they're actively deceiving people.
Yeah, actively deceiving, because they're out there that know the truth. Well, they know that it's not true, but they're still doing it. And I got over it by just accepting it. I had to accept myself and say, Kelita, that's where I was at that time. I couldn't see these things. I didn't question like I'm doing now, because we're kind of told not to question. It's just, that's what the Lord said. That's it. you know, or any questions outside of their field of questions is shut down. So yeah, I got over it by accepting it and expressing myself. I had to let it out, and that's where my YouTube came into it. But yeah, and then also facts. So more knowledge. I deepen my knowing in different things. Yeah, deepen my knowing. Like there's things like the animals mentioned in the Bible geographically doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So that was something I came across recently. I was like, oh wow. And it's just, it was never something I thought to ask. So it's like they basically said, for example, they've written about a polar bear when the polar bear shouldn't have been there. The polar bear is not in that country. So it's just a story. Then you just, oh, I want to use this animal. Let me just write this in.
Yeah.
So yeah. And
Yeah,
it's just, yeah, knowledge.
there's a lot of weird things that like have to come up too as you look into the Jesus stories, where it says like something, I'm probably botching this a little bit, but just it says something like he started here and he was on his way here, and so he started here and went here, 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 and you're like, wait a second, it sounds like you don't know the geography very well. He wouldn't have gone here, 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 and then here, here. That's not the way the travel would work. And it's like, that just doesn't add up. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of little things that just start to fall apart. And it's amazing too, like we talked about an hour ago, about knowing there's a lot more gospels too, that it wasn't just that what was written falls apart that we have as the canon, but that there's a lot of other versions of this same thing. And they may have been just trying to redact different stories and trying to come up with their own version. That's why, like in Genesis, you have two different creation stories, two different Noah stories side by side. Is it 2 animals or is it 7? It just, it blows your mind that they won't be upfront about this stuff and at least tell you, even if they're like, we have an answer for it, or we're at least going to tell you the true story. Like we're going to tell you all the information. We'll give you our spin on it, but then you make up your own mind. It's like, that other stuff doesn't even exist. It's deceptive.
That was another thing, creation. That was a big topic in the church. Like, oh, is there 2 creations? And it's just like, well, no, it's not 2 creations. It's just a more in-depth version of the first one. That's their answer in the Seventh-day Adventist Church anyway. And it's like, I go to it, it's like, it's clearly not. These are 2 separate occasions here. 2 separate. But ask any Seventh-day Adventist now. Be like, no, it's just the one. It's just the one. And then that's where I come in with the character of Yahweh, the Lord. I'm like, who is this character? Who is this character that's come in and done a second creation story and is now evil and wicked? They say it's 6,000 years old, but the world, but clearly, even in the Bible, it says replenish the earth. So that means it must have been older, and there must have been other people, other civilizations. But that then breaks the whole narrative down, because Adam and Eve wouldn't have been the first ones, you see? So they don't like to answer certain questions. They keep it, so they can keep it under control.
Yeah. And they don't even bring up the Egyptian background of a lot of this, where they had the Egyptians had a garden of Aten, and they had a pork taboo, and they had blood magic. They circumcised their boys. Like, this stuff's out of Egypt, a lot of it, and so it's crazy. Well, I was curious. I know I've kept you for a while here, but just to kind of take us to the finish line, how did people treat you after you left? In the quietness of your own heart, what has the peace been like? Compare and contrast your life and just internally before you left and now that you're gone. And then I also kind of wanted to ask on that note, in terms of not just how people have treated you, but how do you deal with people, like you mentioned, your mom is still in it. How do you deal with people who are still stuck in it, knowing that it's mythology, knowing that any version of Christianity is a cult? It isn't just, the Mormons or the JWs that are a cult now. Like, any of it's a cult. how do you deal with the people that you love that are stuck in it? And, just how do you continue to have close relationships with people who see you through a grid of the Bible and Jesus? I can ask those questions separately if that's too much at once.
So how people treated me, like I don't necessarily speak to anyone from the church now. Though the girlfriends who I was close with, they don't speak to me anymore.
Because you
Um,
left?
yeah, you put it that way. Left, and then I was vocal, wasn't I? I didn't just leave. I was vocal about it. So they yeah, just don't talk. And in terms of how they treated me, yeah, we just don't speak. The odd time when I go back to the church, those who I didn't really speak to be honest, they speak to me like I'm a normal person now.
Mm.
They actually do. Like, it's like I know the genuine people, let's put it like that. I know the genuine people who still approach me when I'm no longer associated to it, and they still treated me like I was a normal human being, whereas just people just not talking to me.
Yeah.
Not talking to me because I left. And it was a bit tough because it's like, well, we did have a friendship and we had a relationship together, but now you just don't talk because I don't have the same views as you. So what was the friendship built on? Literally our belief system, or us as a person to person connection,
Yeah.
In terms of my mom, I'm grateful I'm grateful for COVID because it shut down the churches. But I have to admit, my mom is lovely. She's so lovely. I love my
That's
mom to
awesome.
bits. She is, I'd say, a lovely example of a Christian because she's not involved in, she hated the business side of the church as well, and she honestly just wants to fellowship with people and help people holistically. So she's into herbs and natural healing, so medical missionary she calls it. So that's all she wants to do, just help heal people. And like I said, she's never forceful.
Does she ever ask you why you left?
She asked, like, when I first put out like my first video, and it was the one where I says I'm not happy, so I didn't call the Lord a monster in that one. But she's just like, well, if you're not happy, then you're not happy. So she just left it as that. And again, there's no forcefulness of you need to come back to church or you need to pray. There's nothing like that. My mom, she leaves me to be how I am, and then she is how she, and she's happy. So when it comes to how I feel about seeing people who I love like in it, there's nothing she does that I can say you're making yourself suffer here or anything like that. Especially even more so that she doesn't go to the church because it was shut down, and then she's found another community now which is just much better.
Awesome.
And yeah, what helps me seeing people still in it is understanding or knowing the role I view in this reality. And I kind of see that we are meant to, or not meant to, we have the choice and the option to experience life however we choose to. So I just look at it as, okay, you're choosing to experience your life this way. And I can see, in terms of my mom, I can see she's happy. So that makes me happy. So there's no way I'm just like, when I see her, I'm not like, why do you believe in this? Or have you thought about this? Or, no, it doesn't come up because she's doing what she's doing. And our relationship is amazing. It's amazing. So even when she wants to talk about God and say, you know what, I feel the Lord is it, I listen because she's happy. And again, she's not saying anything that's out of her character that she feels like, oh, he's telling me to go and do something silly. It's nothing like that, because then of course I'll speak up. But that's what helps me anyway. I'm just like, everyone is literally experiencing life from a different angle, and my angle is different. I can't tell you to experience it from my angle. So as long as you're genuinely happy and that's what you want to do, then I'm okay with where people are. It's literally the ones who, where I was when I was in religion and I wasn't genuinely happy, it wasn't for me, and that is that type of people who I'm trying to reach out to, because deep down, you know, you're not happy. Deep down, there's something bothering you. So yeah, so that's it.
Yeah, that's good. It sounds like you all have a good relationship. It's really amazing. So many
Yeah.
people tell stories that are horrific and it doesn't work out very smoothly. So I'm glad that yours did. The last question then, the peace. What's the peace been like since you left?
Amazing. It's been amazing. So don't get me wrong, I still go through life's challenges because that happens, doesn't it? But the perspective I'm kind of viewing it from now, things are more internal rather than external. It's more peaceful because a God isn't doing this to me. A God isn't making me suffer. God isn't saying I have to go through any of this, or, you know, I'm not being punished just because I've done something wrong. Oh, I'm being punished. That's something I had to still overcome. Even this year, it has happened. I've even thought, oh, I've done this. Oh, you know, because a bad thing has happened, maybe it's because I've done this type of thing, or, you know, I'm being punished. But that's gone. It's gone because I recognize now it's all from my own choices with what I'm doing. It's all from my own choices. I recognize in the church, I chose to do all that stuff. I chose to go as deep. I chose to ignore any questions. I chose all that. So now bringing it back to me, is peaceful because I'm in control. That's the best way I can put it. I feel like now I'm in control rather than an external Lord controlling me to that will. It's my
Mm,
own will now, my will.
yeah,
So
it's a great way to put it. I love that. And it
yeah.
it isn't, I think Christians would always kind of come back with, you know, well, but despite the fact that you, Kelita, or you, Tim, want to be in charge, the fact is God is on the throne and you're someday going to bow your knee. He's the king whether you acknowledge him or not. But to really, when you work through the mythology side of it, like we talked about earlier, you realize that this stuff is made, it's just made up.
Yeah.
That truly
Yeah.
it isn't Christians, former Christians, who are trying to buck God, who are just trying to say, God, you know, screw you, I'm not going to bow my knee. We're not saying, God, we hate you. We're not saying, God, we won't obey you. We're saying he's not there. We're saying it's not an issue of you know, you want to just sin. We're saying sin isn't a thing.
It's not a thing,
It's
exactly.
like, it's just, and that's where I think a lot of people struggle with it, because they're like, well, you aren't really a Christian, you just want to sin, you just want to do your own thing, you want to be the king or the queen of your castle, and
Yeah.
God is really in charge, and you're going to know it someday and you're going to regret your choices. It's like, we're not saying we want to be in charge. It is a cool side effect that we realize we are the only one that controls our mind, in the sense of the autonomy to choose. But it wasn't like we were saying, God, I want to take something from you. We were just acknowledging he's not there. When
Not
we were
there.
praying, we were talking to the air, we were
Yeah.
talking to the walls. Um, and that there is a freedom to that, knowing, like we talked about earlier, just knowing you were deceived, even we were self-deceived. The freedom
Yeah.
that happens when the scales fall from your eyes and you realize, I was part of a system that was entrenched in power, you know, mostly for men, but power, in fear, shame, control, and based on mythology. And
Mm.
now that I'm out, I've just basically taken a whole bunch of really bad ideas and I've pushed them aside. And I'm now
Yeah.
free to actually figure out what, for the, as much as we can, figure out what life is about and what I want to, or it's not really about anything, but you know, what I'm going to make it, what I'm going to choose to make my life about. I'm more of a nihilist than to say that there's a plan, but you know, just to say that there is no plan, there is no guy moving the dominoes around. I'm going to take whatever power I can over my own thoughts, my own heart, my own life, my own relationships, and make my life the best I can. And hopefully when we die, we can look back and say at the end of our lives, before we die, I think I left this planet better than I found it. And that's a really cool choice to make. And just to think, you know, that just to be free from mythology is such a cool thing. And to realize when you contrast yourself to other people, most people, at least that I know of, who are neck deep in it, I'm sure there's some more examples that I just haven't come across, but most people that I personally know who are stuck in it are not even remotely close to asking some of the basic questions we've talked about today. They appear to be headed to be stuck in it till they die.
Yeah.
And that just, I feel like I won the lottery, you know?
Yeah.
I got out. I got out of prison. We all had the key, but I personally was like, oh, I do have the key, and here, let's get out. They have the key too, but they're choosing to sit in a very dark and sad, empty cell.
Yeah, and that's their choice, because I guess that's how they want to experience their life. So that's why I'm just like, I don't even take any guilt. I don't feel guilty or sorry for them. I'm just like, it's your choice. I recognize now. So
yeah,
live
and let live. Well, I totally appreciate your sharing your story today. I know we've gone a little bit over, but I also just wanted to end by giving a little plug for your channel. I'm going to have the link right beneath our video, so everyone please go like and subscribe to Kelita. Hit the bell so you see when she comes out with new videos. You're doing some things in different ways with passion and energy and power and dynamics that are really amazing. I highly encourage people to go check out your videos. You've done some really cool stuff. It's a great channel. I look forward to seeing what you come up with in the next few months and years. But please, everyone, like and subscribe. Could you just give a 30-second blurb for what is your passion about on that channel?
So my passion ultimately is about expressing my thoughts. So where I've come from, now I'm definitely going towards the direction of this reality and how we function. So because for me, that helps me to understand and to get through things like religion. I feel that is the basis. When you can understand how this reality functions, then you can take a step back and then organize everything out. So that is my channel in a nutshell. And so if you want to come on the journey with me, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I look forward to following up with you at some point. I say this a lot, but I really do love to think about connecting with people down the line, 6 months or a year or whatever, and seeing kind of how things have evolved and where your journey is taking you, and kind of what new passions are on your mind and what topics are on your radar for helping the community. Because a lot of what we're doing is just saying to other people who are going through some tough parts of their journey to say it's going to get better. And if you need, some of you just need information, you're doing fine. You just want more information about where the mythology came from. We can provide some of that, but some of it's just people know a lot of this stuff. They're just struggling because they're ostracized or shunned by their family, or they're struggling to rebuild their community, or they're realizing they've wasted a lot of their time and energy on this mythology. And it's a lot of emotional baggage, and people just need to know you're not alone, and it does get better. So I appreciate your part in that. So that's really awesome. Was there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
No, that is it. Thank you for having me. It was lovely. I've not really spoke about religion so much for a while, so it was nice. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. Again, everyone, we've been speaking with Kelita Sahliah in Birmingham. I'm probably botching the pronunciation. Birmingham, UK. Thank you again. It's been great to get to know you, and look forward to doing it again sometime. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.